Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. On this edition of the program, we discuss what drives the Russia-China relationship. Critics claim it is a marriage of convenience. Proponents say otherwise. It is the pivotal relationship of the 21st century. Cross-talking some real news. I'm joined by my guest, Dmitry Babich. He's a political analyst with Sputnik International. And in London, we cross to Marcus Papadopoulos. He's the editor of Politics First magazine. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Let me go to Marcus first in London. We had in St. Petersburg over the last few days a visit by the Chinese president, sealed some new trading deals with Russia. But at the same time, we had this gathering commemorating the 75th landing at Normandy. Which two events of the last few days will be remembered most in history? Go ahead, Marcus.
Well, anyone who fought against Nazism or who fought against Imperial Japan should be commemorated and should be celebrated. However, ever since the end of the Second World War, unfortunately, in the West, principally America and Britain, history has been rewritten. Because if someone from another planet came to Earth, they would think that World War II began and ended on the beaches of Normandy, which is, of course, absolutely incorrect. It was on the Eastern Front where World War II was won and lost. It is on the Eastern Front that the Wehrmacht incurred 88% of their total wartime casualties. Or let me put it in another way. Of every 5 German soldiers killed in World War II, 4 were killed fighting against the Red Army. And it is the sacrifices of the Red Army that enabled Nazism to be defeated, to be destroyed. And Peter, you and I would not be having this discussion today on Crosstalk without the sacrifices of the Soviet Union.
Exactly. Dima, exactly.
Well, that's absolutely true, but also I would like to make it clear why Putin and Xi Jinping did not come to France. First, they were not invited because it was supposed to be at the prime ministerial level for some reason this year. And second, in 2015, when Russia and China commemorated their victory days in May and in September, the end of huge, tremendous suffering, you know, the two nations that lost most during that war, the Western leaders didn't come. Obama was invited. He didn't come to Moscow. He didn't come to Beijing, even though he was invited. So now when the mainstream Western press is heaping all criticism on Trump, well, I think Trump has been behaving very badly in the last few years. But it all started under Obama. Mm-hmm. So, you know, talking about this anti-Chinese trade war and other things, I think the relationship between the liberal establishment and Trump is like the relationship between Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Trump is doing openly something that the liberal elite has started doing secretly. Obama did not include China in the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Well, that was intentional.
Absolutely. He did not include Russia. He did not include China. He did not include the two biggest nations of West Pacific into Trans-Pacific Partnership. So it was clear that this partnership would die. And when Trump killed it, he basically continued what Obama started doing. So before you criticize Trump, who is Mr. Hyde, look into the molecules of evil inside Mr. Jekyll. Is Mr. Jekyll nice? No. This is the relationship between the liberal establishment in the United States and Trump. They allow him to do unpopular things that they themselves wanted to do.
Exactly. Let's go back to London. Marcus, let's talk about China and Russia. I mean, the critics of this relationship, growing relationship, they call it a marriage of convenience. You can also argue, as I said in my introduction, that it may be the pivotal relationship of the 21st century. What say you, Marcus?
Well, Peter, it was only in 2016 when I gave a speech at King's College London on Russian-Sino relations, in which I asked, can the relationship between Moscow and Beijing become even closer? Well, 3 years on from that speech, It has. It is at an unprecedented high level. And there are a number of factors for that. One of them is that Russia has an extraordinary amount of natural resources, and China lacks natural resources, in particular water. And the Chinese economy is massively dependent on natural resources. So the Russians, of course, are supplying oil, gas, coal, and also water to China, which is crucial for the Chinese economy. Also, China and Russia are alarmed at American aggression in the world. China is alarmed at the increase in American naval presence in the South China Sea. China is alarmed at the American defense system in South Korea. And of course, Russia is alarmed by NATO in Eastern Europe. But, and I know this is going to disappoint some people, Peter, the idea that Russia and China are going to come together to take on America and bankrupt America is, of course, folly. The Chinese, over the last 40 years, have achieved nothing short of an economic miracle. And that miracle has been based on its relationship with China. So the Chinese will not do anything that could jeopardize their economic standing. So I would describe the relationship between Russia and China as something I fully support. I think it's good for global peace. I think it's good for global stability. But Russia and China are more allies than they are
I think that's a very good point. And actually, that is my position as well. You know, Dima, we've heard a lot about this relationship. Some people call it strategic partnership. There's been a lot of words, okay? Trade is upticking, but it's still relatively small when you compare the kind of trade that Russia still has with Europe. So, I mean, are actions now finally catching up with words?
Well, I think this in fact, coalition, this union between Russia and China would have never been possible if it hadn't been for the conduct of the West. And I don't mean just the United States, I mean also the European Union. Because, you know, the kind of articles that appeared on this D-Day, you know, Anthony Beaver in the Times compared Russians and Chinese.
That was really disappointing to me, because he's a great historian. He's a great historian.
He's an interesting historian, but his analogy was that Russia and China are now like the German Nazis, and Trump is disintegrating the Western alliance against them. So he's misbehaving, you know. He's a new appeaser. And this parallel is absolutely wrong. It's actually immoral. The same parallel from Tom Rogan in the Washington Examiner. I'm asking myself, would American public support a modern amphibious assault to liberate a foreign country? What if China seized the Japanese islands of Senkaku? First, they are not Japanese, they're uninhabited, and they're argued, you know.
There are so many levels of errors in that article.
Territory. And then, what if Russia invaded the Baltics? Would we start an amphibious assault to help NATO push them out of there? These are provocative, terrible statements, and unfortunately, they are not marginal. They reflect the mainstream of the Western media. So in this situation, when the United States went on war against Huawei, and CNN, of all the media outlets, CNN is writing that this Huawei ban risks slowing down countrywide adoption in the United States of the 5G. So maybe we will be lagging behind China. Quote, now even Russia, not usually thought of as a tech leader, may be poised to pull ahead. End of quote. So the United States and the leadership of the United States in the EU are becoming an impediment for technological development by their trade wars, by their trade wars.
Everything you just mentioned there, let me turn back to London Marcus here. I mean, it's built into the mix that Russia and China are the enemy. I mean, you look at this. This is this preparation of the populace to deem Russia and China in league together. Oh my goodness, you know, threatening Western institutions and their way of life. I mean, just the very rhetorical pitch tells you a whole lot about the policy perceptions. Look, we have the United States changing its foreign policy and defense postures, assuming that the adversaries that they will fight is not the war on terrorism, because it was never a war on terrorism, but now great peer power confrontations, which of course keeps the defense industries well paid, okay? And if you invested in those companies, you're going to make a lot of money. Go ahead, Marcos.
Well, I think that American politicians, both liberal and conservative, really are wretched creatures, because undoubtedly there are some who do believe that Russia and China are going to team up to take on America. And what is their fear because of that? That the Russians and the Chinese will impair America's ability to wage war around the world.
And what's wrong with that?
Absolutely.
What's wrong with that?
China did not attack a single country in the last 35 years, unlike the United States, unlike the EU.
Keep going, Marcus. Keep going.
That's what I mean. It is stomach-turning that these people in America on Capitol Hill, they want to continue ruining people's lives. They want to continue destabilizing global peace and stability, and they fear that Russia and China could prevent them from doing it. It really is an inverted world. And the commentators that Dimitri just referred to, well, personally, I wouldn't give them any airtime whatsoever. But these are the same people who don't question how Bill Clinton said that God told him to bomb Serbia, or how George W. Bush or how God told George W. Bush to invade Iraq, or how Mike Pompeo recently said that Donald Trump was born to protect Israel from Iran. These people are curiously silent on what I would describe as crackpot comments.
Yeah, well, Dima, I mean, the imperial endeavor is bipartisan. I'll give you the last word in this part.
Well, right now, the Russia-Chinese trade is $108 billion, and usually the critics point to the fact
that...
It's
a lot of it's energy. A lot of it is energy,
and the critics point to this fact saying, oh, the American-Chinese trade is still much bigger. Well, 200 billion of it have already been additional tariffs were imposed on them, 25%. 300 billion are under threat of such tariffs. So if the United States and if the Western world at large continues behaving in that way, Russia's trade with China will grow, and we'll have more confidence in each other.
I want to thank Marcus Papadopoulos for joining us here in London. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on some real news. Stay with our team. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lebel. To remind you, we're discussing some real news. And now we're joined by Alexander Makiris in London. He's a writer on legal affairs as well as editor-in-chief of theduran.com. All right, let's go to London. Alex, I know you heard the first part of the story program here. Let's continue with the Russia-China story here. It's kind of flippant from what we talked about with Marcus Papadopoulos. I mean, really what is at stake here, and as I said in my introduction, this may be the pivotal relationship of the 21st century, because what essentially is in process of being played out is the integration of the Eurasian landscape, where we have economic integration and very little competition between Russia and China. Actually, they're working together. That is a world historic event in and itself, and it actually happened in the 1990s, remarkably under Boris Yeltsin. This is what the U.S. and its allies fear most: is the integration of the part of the world and the population of the world where there is essentially what is growing the global economy. This is what they want to push back against. Go ahead in London.
Yes, this is exactly right, Peter. I mean, it is the gigantic economic integration of Eurasia, as you correctly say. This is what China's Belt and Road project is principally about. We see discussions about uniting that, unifying that with the Eurasian economic community, which the Russians have built. We see roads being built. We see railway lines now being discussed. We've seen massive pipelines that are now coming into very soon coming into action, transporting Russian gas and oil to China. We see talk about joint ventures to develop the Arctic and the vast Arctic reserves of gas and oil that the Russians have. We see talk between the Russians and the Chinese to unify their e-commerce systems.
Yep.
China is very advanced in that field, Russia much less so, but we see that happening. We see discussions between the Russians and the Chinese to develop joint aircraft projects. They will be co-hosting the MAX 2019 air show in Moscow. I mean, this is a gigantic enterprise. And if I can just say something about some of the things that were discussed in the first segment, very interesting comments about D-Day. But here we see the Western allies looking backwards to 1944, and the Chinese and the Russians looking forward into the 21st century. The contrast could not be greater.
You know, and let me just stay with Alexander McCarris in London. I think also with this Belt and Road initiative, I think what also the West is wary of is that it's the demonstration effect. Nothing succeeds like success, because we have countries like Italy, for example, getting involved in this initiative in certain sectors. If this takes off and does come to fruition, it will have a demonstration effect and erode the remaining Western institutions that have a form of hegemony. This is what they fear. They fear success. Go ahead, before I go to Dima.
Absolutely, that's exactly what they're afraid of. I mean, they look at this gigantic Eurasian economic and political system that has been created. And we should talk about a system rather than an alliance, because I entirely endorse the view that this is not directed against anyone.
Exactly.
But the West. But the Westerners see this, and it means that they are no longer, West is no longer the center of the economic and political universe, as it has been. In fact, potentially, Eurasia would outmatch them in economic resources. Now, an intelligent policy would be to partner with it, to join it in some way. Instead of what they're trying to do is they're trying to obstruct it. But with every step they take to obstruct it, they increase the impetus, both by the Chinese and the Russians, to pursue it. Because what the Russians and the Chinese have found is that they can trust each other and work well together. They can't do so to the same extent with the United States or with its European allies in the West anymore.
Yep, very good point, considering what the European Union did to Ukraine in 2014. Dima, a lot of critics of this here, a lot of critics say that that Russia is getting involved in a relationship. We can find alliance, partner, whatever, okay? But the kind of working with China the way they are, that Russia will inevitably be the junior partner. How do you react to that?
There was such a danger, but the West is liquidating this danger by its own actions. Because originally, this so-called New Silk Road was very much supported by Zbigniew Brzezinski, because what later became Belt and Road Initiative was supposed to go through the Central Asian republics, former Central Asian republics of the Soviet Union, to the Caspian, and then via the South Caucasus to Europe. But look what happened. Suddenly, China saw that the United States and the West in general is the source of instability. They started the trade war, the technology war with Huawei. It was not China who started this confrontation. China tried to make peace. And few observers noted this, but Xi Jinping, after his meeting with Putin, he goes to Bishkek, he goes to Dushanbe, the capitals of the Central Asian republics.
Very smart.
For the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting. I advise our viewers, go to the documents, go to the resolutions of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization, and compare them to the resolutions of NATO. From NATO, it's always, we are threatened. Russia is a threat, China is a threat, our alliance is facing enormous external pressures. CSTO or Shanghai Cooperation Organization were not directed against any country. We're fighting terrorism, we're fighting extremism, we cooperate. None of us is the big brother, none of us is the biggest one. it's only the Western press that says China is the biggest one, or Russia is the biggest one. And look at the economic results. Basically, China is now reorienting its trade routes to Russia because Russia is a reliable partner. Unlike the allies of the United States, it will not go away. It will not, for example, follow the U.S. sanctions against Iran, as the European countries basically did, despite all the rhetoric from the European Union, the big business is pulling out of Iran.
It shows their spineless approach
Absolutely.
to this.
So from the Chinese side, it's a very pragmatic, rational approach. If we're treated like that, in such a hostile way by the United States, if the EU is spineless, then Russia and the Eurasian Union, they are the truly reliable partners.
Okay, let me go back to London. Alexander, again, I think the way that the United States and the Washington consensus, let's put it that way, they seem to want to create a zero-sum world. You're either with us or against us, and essentially having two mega civilizations, the West and the Chinese world in its orbit here. I think that's what they're driving, and they're trying to make countries side with one another, which would be, well, counterproductive. Instead of looking for a compromise and trying to find mutual interests, it is actually looking for confrontation. It's either us or them. Go ahead in London.
Yes, that is exactly what the United States does. It looks at every single development around the world in which it is not directly involved, and it sees a threat. And if the United States wants to create a situation where the Chinese and the Russians both start to see the United States as an adversary, that is exactly what the United States will achieve by treating them in that way. Now, the Chinese and the Russians have both repeatedly gone to extraordinary lengths to try to reassure the United States that they are not adversaries of the United States. Xi Jinping went to visit Donald Trump soon after Donald Trump was elected. The Chinese had a very, very successful trading relationship with the United States, just as Marcus Papadopoulos said. The Russians, in the case of the Russians, Mr. Putin, to the annoyance of many people, still refers to the Americans as our partners.
Yeah.
They still want good relations with the United States. It is the United States which first insisted on imposing this unipolar conception on the world, and is now that's passing, is trying to shape it into a bipolar one, presumably in order to enforce stricter bloc discipline upon those countries which it continues to call its allies.
You know, Dima, you said something, and I'd like to expand upon it. I mean, when I asked you, would Russia become a junior partner in this parlay here? And I think you should kind of reiterate, and I think it's really hitting the nail on the head, is that there's a trust. There's a Chinese-Russia trust right there, where there is trust in this relationship. There is a lack of trust when the Chinese look at the United States, when Russia looks at the United States and its allies. There's an enormous amount of distrust because words and actions are never matched, hardly ever matched.
In trade, in business, very rarely you have junior and senior partners because both partners are necessary for each other. You are selling something to another person or another company. He is as necessary to you as you are to him, right? So that kind of relationship does not presuppose, seniority. With the West, it's a different story because we have the third totalitarianism. We had communist totalitarianism, we had Nazi totalitarianism, now we have ultra-liberal totalitarianism in the West. It's very funny when they call China an authoritarian state, while Putin in jail, Maria Butina, simply because she talked to some people in the Republican Party, even at the
and she liked the guns.
And she just, basically tried to implant some American political culture in Russia, namely the right to bear
Second Amendment
arms.
rights.
Exactly. Right. The same story with Mateusz Piskorski in Poland, who spent 3 years in jail without trial, on the charge of influencing public opinion in the ways useful for Russia. That's now a terrible crime, in Poland. So the West has slowly become totalitarian, and in totalitarian structures you have senior
we
and
can
junior.
make an entire program on that one sentence there. We have run out of time here. I want to thank Alexander Mikiris in London for joining us. That's all the time we have. Many thanks to my guests here in Moscow and in London, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.